Ken Trahan with Lenny Vangilder. It's our First NBC Bank weekend preview brought to you by First NBC Bank with 35 locations throughout Southeast Louisiana and the Florida Panhandle. That's First NBC Bank, proud sponsor of SportsNOLA.com. Game 1 of the preseason is in the books for the New Orleans Saints, a 30-27 loss at Baltimore. Lost in the last second, last play of the game. Is that really important? Probably not, although Sean Payton said afterwards he was mad because he thinks with a young team it's important to win. Lenny, it's preseason, so you couch it that way and you start that way and don't get carried away with things. The positives were obvious. The quarterbacks, all three, I thought distinguished themselves well. Certainly, you like Kyrie Robinson and what he did. Brandon Cooks, you can't help but like that. Andrus Peat playing different positions and holding up rather well. And then, of course, a couple of individuals. And Cameron Jordan had a little pressure. Anthony Spencer, a little pressure. Damian Swann, an interception. Terrence Frederick, an interception. Then there were the negatives, and, of course, the penalties, more first and foremost. 16 for 143 yards, unacceptable. And the defense getting gashed by Baltimore's first team. It looked like a continuation of last season, and for that matter, last year's regular season game with Baltimore.
Right. The 3 times that they've faced off here in the last 2 years, preseason a year ago, week 4, the regular season, and then this one, you're right. The Baltimore ran the ball at will against New Orleans defense in all of those games. You mentioned the score 30-27. Score doesn't matter. The 2 numbers that matter to me are 16 and 6. 16 being the penalties you mentioned, and 6, the number of guys that got carted off the field with injuries. Hopefully, none of those too serious. Are we going to find out anything? Of course, we're not going to. You're not going to hear a thing about this.
Unless the players tell us by tweeting or something.
Right. You're going to, you're reading between the, trying to read tea leaves and figure out what people are really trying to say, or sources are going to tell you. But Sean Payton, for the record, is not going to say anything about this unless someone ends up on injured reserve. And I guess that's always possible with these. But at least the early indications on the starters were that, Ellerby may have re-aggravated a toe injury, and the other 2 guys, Browner and Bro being a guy who could be a nickel guy, probably not a starter, maybe not as serious as maybe they first appeared. So that is good if that is indeed the case, although, again, we won't really know.
No, you really won't. Of course, the other positive is alluded to. Saints got 2 turnovers and did not turn the ball over, coming off of a season in which they were minus 13 in turnover margin, second to last in the NFL. So that's one positive trend if you're trying to pluck something from it. The Patriots will work out with the Saints at the Greenbrier this week. Then they'll come to New Orleans to play the Saints next Saturday evening. The Saints breaking training camp to do so at that particular time. So moving forward, Lenny, I guess the competition at wide receiver looks unresolved because you had guys that performed. The competition at quarterback, perhaps unresolved because all 3 guys did a nice job. And then the situation in the secondary has to be a concern because of the injuries.
It does. And, let's start with the quarterbacks. The thing with the quarterbacks is this. If something happens to Drew Brees, and obviously he didn't play a snap last night, which one of those 3 guys do you trust the most putting them out there in a situation?
Well, there's an obvious answer.
I'm not sure there is one based on what I saw last night because while the 3rd series, McCown finally did some things, Griffin did some things, and Grayson when he got his shot, I liked his mobility.
Me too. And his decision making.
Yeah. That said, that was all against second and third teamers. The early on, there were 2 3-and-outs when you were facing starters against Baltimore's defense. The few starters that were in on either side. That was the situation that you face. So that does concern me a little bit. While, yes, those guys all did good things, when was it that they did them? It was later in the game when there were reserves in the game.
Well, it's all about Ryan Griffin. Do they really trust him enough to say, okay, Jets, okay, somebody else that's in desperate need of a quarterback, what will you give us for Luke McCown? Because there might be some marketability for a guy that's proven he can play in the league and step in if necessary. If that's there, then maybe the carrot is dangled and maybe they bite it. If not, then it won't. I'll tell you one thing about Grayson. The play that impressed me and that told me that he might be an NFL player is the play on 3rd down, the throw he made to Willie Snead with unbelievable pressure in his face. He did not panic. He was calm as could be, could hardly see over the pressure, and made an unbelievable throw to Snead.
Yeah, that was encouraging. And look, you got to remember something. These rookies, okay, it's the first time, and yeah, it's a practice game. It's a preseason game. It's an exhibition game, whatever you want to call it. It's the first time these guys are putting on a real NFL uniform, and you know there are going to be some butterflies out there. But we'd gotten some reports that, You know, he wasn't doing some great things in camp, but he certainly looked the part of a third-round draft pick Thursday night.
That's why, and I don't mean to downplay training camp, but guys, I mean, listen, just because a guy has a good practice doesn't mean anything. Just because he has a good week of camp doesn't mean anything. What matters is when you turn the lights on. There are some guys that are good practice players who do squat in games, others who aren't real good practice players who step up in games. It happens all the time, and I fully expect that's going to be the case. One other note from the game before we move on, kicking competition. That's alive and well.
It is. And by the way, were you just talking about practice?
Practice.
We're talking about practice.
Practice.
Okay. That's crazy. But no, kicking competition, I think either one of those guys could handle a job based on what I saw. You know what's interesting to me is, you know, it's a copycat league, as we all know. I'm interested to see, going through the first full week of preseason, how many teams are going to work on going for two with the new extra point rules. Extra point from if you try a placement, it's going to be, you know, snapped at the 15, basically a 33-yard kick, as opposed to going for two from the 2-yard line. New England, by the way, went for two on their first touchdown last night.
What a surprise.
The Patriots and the Saints never do anything alike. Now, were it not for the fact that you're trying to figure out who your kicker is, I would imagine Sean Payton would go out and do the same thing next week. But that said, I think he's got to figure out, more important to figure out who your kicker is going to be first. But both of those guys, with the one exception of the missed 50-yard field goal, an impressive night for the kickers.
Turning to college football, Tulane has a scrimmage tomorrow morning, Saturday morning. By the way, when the scrimmage is over with, we will have Curtis Johnson on the Three Tailgater Show with Ed Daniels, myself, and Rick Gailey on WGSO 990 AM from the field. So listen in tomorrow morning. And Lenny, obviously the interest where Tulane is concerned, I think my interest is peaked. I think this team has a chance to break through, but the kicking game must improve dramatically. Defense, I think, has a chance to be very solid overall. And then offensively, I really like their running backs and their quarterback, and their offensive line is a year older. I think it's all about their wide receivers.
Wide receivers are important. I think offensive line is very important. If you saw Renee Nato's story earlier this week at SportsNOLA.com on that, you know, with 4 returning starters, you've got to be able to do two things. You got to be able to protect the quarterback, and you got to be able to block for a running game. And they ran the ball fairly well last year. And they're going to be even better with those guys a year older. You add Rob Kelly back into the mix. They really like the young man from Warren Easton, who's got a chance to do some things as well. So you've really got, you know, a good group of backs to deal with there. And, you know, on the defensive side, the one thing that Tulane has done well the last couple of years is force turnovers. They've got to do that, and they've got to be able to get off the field when the opportunity presents itself, a lot like what they did in 2013. They've got to be opportunistic, and that's part of the reason they had the success they had in 2013. Manage the game on the offensive side, make some big plays on the defensive side.
Nigel Anderson cleared by the NCAA, so he's eligible now, too, from East St. John. LSU has Media Day and Fan Day coming up on Sunday. Of course, the Tigers, their question marks, everybody has them, and it's ad nauseum, the quarterback position and the defensive line.
You know, what's interesting to me is obviously we're seeing more of Harris with the ones than we're seeing of Jennings at this point, and I think that's twofold. One, obviously, you know, the off-field issues that Jennings was dealing with during the summer to kind of set him back, but two, Harris, as long as he continues to do things and doesn't, so to speak, shoot himself in the foot, he may remain with the ones. And you know, as long as he keeps doing the right things, and he's apparently a much more solid, sound decision maker this year than he was last year, you know, with a year in the system. So, yeah, obviously, we're not going to find out about that. You talk about Sean Payton talking about injuries. Les Miles ain't going to tell us who the quarterback is until they line up for the first snap against McNeese in 3 weeks. So it's, you know, how that will all play out. But the thing is, you know, do you really have two guys that could run the offense? I think so. You know, the old saying about you got two quarterbacks, you got none. I'm not sure that's quite the case here.
I'm with you. And that's our First NBC Bank weekend preview, brought to you by First NBC Bank, with 35 locations throughout the greater New Orleans area, also in the Florida Panhandle, and growing. That's First NBC Bank, proud sponsor of SportsNOLA.com. Lenny, have a great weekend.
All right, we'll see you Monday.
And I'm Kenny for Lenny. Thanks for joining us, and God bless you.